Welcome to the informational meeting of Tuesday, December 6th, 2022. Let's just jump right in. We've got a quorum here, so let's go to committee reports. Let's go to the operation committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had a productive operations meeting last week. We recommended one change to the travels policy, which will allow staff to claim mileage in town, which will come before you by the end of the month. We also went through a complete review of the policies and procedures manual. There was a good discussion, and we ultimately asked staff to draft sections on a few topics that will help to memorialize our current processes and to provide a greater level of detail on our organization, obligations, and operations. We'll review those recommendations at a meeting in a few months, make revisions as needed, and then take appropriate steps to bring any recommendations before the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Cole. The Siouxland Heritage Museum Board, Councilor Starr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The great thing about one of the best parts of being on the board for the Siouxland Heritage Museum is that the December meeting is a meeting with the staff that turns into a potluck that is served by the museum staff. So to get in to interact and spend some time with the day-to-day operations and the staff who run the museum. So not much of a report, but a lot of good soup and crock pot type meals.
Thank you. This time we'll have council remarks. Councilor McCarris.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Fellow councilors, we get to the end of the year here. One thing I've been thinking about and had conversation with some of you about kind of a couple months ago was this concept. I know that's been done before a little bit, is coffee with a counselor, where once a month, maybe a couple of counselors are at grocery store X or store X on Saturday morning from 9 to 11. Over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to just reach out to all of you and see if there's any interest during 2023, whatever year's coming, 2023, if there's any interest in potentially just having a rotation where the second or third Saturday, we know that 2 counselors will be at store X. If each of us did that 3 times during the year, we'd have the year covered. So I just want to give everybody a heads up. I'm going to be reaching out about that and see if there's any interest. The main reason I'm bringing it up right now is we'll be having a presentation about pools coming forward in the next couple of weeks, and I know it's a really big opportunity for our city. And I think it's important that we get out in front of our community at a time like this. So I just wanted to make everybody aware I'll be reaching out to have conversation about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I look forward to that. That'll be fun. Other council remarks? Seeing none, everybody's going to hold their breath a little bit and try and get into the most exciting presentation about traffic.
All right, good afternoon, Council. I am Andy Berg. I'm the city engineer for the City of Sioux Falls Public Works Department. My name's on the presentation, but that is about as far as it goes for me. We've got a very talented team, traffic team here to speak to you today. Heath will do a lot of the introductions for his team as he gets into the presentation. So we look forward to a great question and answer after the presentation. He's got a lot of great information. He'll go through it quick. We saved the stuff for the last few slides related to some of the things that we've gotten recently from different council members with some questions. So we'll do that at the end, so it'll be fresh in everybody's mind. But with that, I'll bring Heath Hofteser up here, our traffic operations engineer, to kick it off.
Welcome.
Hey everybody, Heath Hofteser, our traffic operations engineer, here to talk about traffic. So here we go. So this is just a quick overview of the agenda we're going to run through today. I'm going to try to go a little fast with some of this so we have time for questions and interacting at the end too, but well, looking forward to this. First, we're going to start off with just a few quick historical traffic trivia items for you guys. The first one is when the first traffic signal was put in place. And the very first one was in London in 1868, and it was ran manually by police officers. The next question is when the first electric traffic signal was put in place. And that was 1914 in Cleveland, Ohio, when the first electric traffic signal was put in place. And then in the city of Sioux Falls, when was our first electric traffic signal put in place? That was 1925 and at the intersection of 10th Street and Phillips Avenue. So just a little background on historical traffic trivia for you guys. Here's a slide from 10th Street and Phillips Avenue from 1962. A couple interesting points on here. It's got some of the older pedestrian signs where it says "Don't leave curb" up on the corner on the traffic signal, and it's advertising the 1962 NAIA National Track and Field Championships at Wood Field. And the big thing for me that's a takeaway from this is that we've always had issues ever since the advent of the vehicle with interactions between pedestrians and vehicles. As you can see, the person that's trying to make a left turn into the people walking through the intersection in this photo. So anyways, it's just an interesting photo that we wanted to share with you guys. Who we are for traffic. First is in our program management, we have Shannon Austin, Shannon's does the vast majority of our transportation planning for the city and is involved in a lot of what we do. And then our traffic operations team, that involves me, and then our traffic engineer, Danica Settler, that's back in the audience. And then we also have our engineering technicians, Matt Rock, Dan Moen, and Jeff Ragsdale, that work with us on all the things that we do also. And then along with our traffic operations, we have our traffic maintenance team, which is led by Jerry Jongling as the light and power and traffic superintendent. And then his traffic devices maintenance supervisor is Ryan Campbell, who's also out here in the audience with us. And then he leads a team of our traffic signal technicians and traffic sign technicians for a lot of the things that we do for keeping the traffic moving throughout the city. Our mission is to move all modes of transportation safely and efficiently for all the residents of Sioux Falls. And we're going to go into a few of the things that we do to try to do that. One of the things, it's interesting, we have this newspaper article on the right side of the page here that's from July 1959 talking about the new pedestrian signals that were the leave curb and don't leave curb that were added to the intersections to try to help the pedestrians, which we also saw those in the earlier picture from 10th Street and Phillips Avenue. And those since evolved into the walk and don't walk words, and then those words eventually evolved into the hand and man symbols that we see at the intersections. And that's it. Traffic signals are always evolving, and we're always changing the equipment, trying to come up with what the best things are for the public to understand the messages that are trying to be conveyed, and we're always trying to make it a uniform and consistent message too. And then a big part of that is the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. So this is in the Code of Federal Regulations as the national standard for traffic control devices on streets open to travel. And then we also have this, the state has adopted this also, and we have it in our city ordinances that we follow the MUTCD. And most states follow the MUTCD as it's written, and then there's some that have supplementals, such as they'll change, like California changes the color of some of their school crosswalks to the fluorescent yellow-green, which is a supplement to the manual. But the idea behind it is that everybody tries to follow the manual, and then things are the same when you're in California, when you're in Vermont, when you're in Kentucky, when you're in South Dakota, so that you're seeing the same things on the road, and it's easier for people to understand what they're expected to do when they're driving. Some quick examples from the MUTCD. It goes into a lot of detail on traffic control for construction, and we have up on the screen on the left side is a typical application showing how signs should be set up for a work zone. On the right's kind of, it's from Kiwanis Avenue a couple years ago when we were doing concrete repairs, where it shows a work zone laid out with traffic control. And so we do a lot of work with our CIP plans and with contractors that are doing work. We do a lot of work with the traffic control plans and trying to make sure that what they put out on the road is safe for the public so that everybody understands what we want them to do going through the work zones. So go through some of our assets that we have. The first is our traffic signs. We have over 43,000 traffic signs in the city of Sioux Falls. And of these signs, it's about a 15-year replacement cycle that we have for the signs. in order to figure out when we need to replace them, we keep track in our asset management on when the signs were installed, so we know how old they are at all the different locations. And then we also use a retroreflectometer for testing how reflective the intersections are too. So Ryan's holding up the retroreflectometer, which you can see some of the different signs we have. We have, well, there might be down there low. There's an old faded stop sign, some newer stop signs. And so we're able to go up to the signs and we can take a reading to see if it still meets the standards for being visible or not. So that's some of what we use for determining when we need to replace them. And then the other interesting thing is for signs, we do a lot of sign production in the city of Sioux Falls. We have equipment set up so that most of the signs that aren't typical, we make ourselves at our sign shop. We'll go in like street name signs, since every one of them is different, and then parking signs, since there's a lot of variability in those. We'll make all those at our traffic shop, print out the faces, and then put them on the aluminum blanks. And then we also have a lot of blank aluminum blanks sitting in our sign shop, and we'll order sign faces for the more common signs like stop signs and yield signs, and we have those sitting in a drawer. So then we'll pull out the face for the stop sign, put it on the aluminum blank, and then press it onto the blank to make those signs. So we, in a way, we make all the signs that we put out on the street, but we print probably a little over half the signs that we put out, and we order the others. So just interesting things on what we do with our signs. Next is our pavement markings on the streets. So there's over 3,000 lane miles in Sioux Falls, and we have over 500 miles of 4-inch lines that run around throughout the city. It's yellow. And the interesting thing, if you have yellow pavement markings, that's separating traffic that's going different directions, and the white pavement markings separating traffic that's going the same direction. And then, you know, you can read it off the slide, but it's worth noting that we have over 3,800 turning movement arrows. We have 1,300 stop bars. We have 1.7 acres of crosswalk markings throughout the city and 10,000 square feet of bicycle markings. And there's more of in the downtown, we've got a lot of the spots where we've got the bike markings that have the green background underneath them, and we're planning more of those in projects going forward over the next few years also. Some of our other big assets are traffic signals. Back in 1983, the city only had 102 traffic signals. Now, 40 years later, we have 300 traffic signals exactly right now in the city of Sioux Falls, which means we got 300 intersections where we're maintaining controller cabinets, and then half of those have battery backups that we've put in place at intersections too. All new intersections get battery backups now when we're putting them in. It's something so that those small power outages, we just don't have intersections going dark then when that happens at locations, and it's something we plan to keep doing going forward. At this point, over 99% of our signal indications have LEDs in them. We also brought a 5-section signal head for you guys to take a look at. It's people always find that interesting, and I think people find that it's a little bigger than they think it is once they get an up-close look at the signal heads. And then nationwide, there's approximately 300,000 traffic signals that are in the U.S. And then on average, most metro communities, there's about 1 traffic signal for every 1,000 people in a metro community. We have a few more traffic signals than that in Sioux Falls. And the big reason for that is that Sioux Falls is a kind of a regional area. It's an attraction, a draw. You know, we might have a little over 200,000 people here for our population, but during a typical day with people coming to town for visiting, shopping, and working, it's over 250,000 in the city. So that's why we feel that we have more than we typically would for our population. And then another thing that we have on most of our traffic signals is the preemption for emergency services. And we brought our handheld, I don't know if you want to grab that, Dan. We brought our handheld emitter that we use for testing. So give you a little. When you guys ask, can I get one? That, right there, that would do it for you, turn the signal, so. So we use that for testing the intersections. Next is traffic signal locations, camera statistics. On the right side, we have a map that shows where all the traffic signals are throughout the city. It's the little dots that are on the map showing the traffic signals. We have, throughout the city, on our 4 adaptive traffic systems, there's 130 fixed cameras. We have 92 other intersections that have video detection at them, and there's 128 cameras on those intersections. And then the access cameras that we bring in through Milestone for like our monitor wall in the city center, and a lot of the PD uses, and a lot of different parts of the city are using now. There's 121 fixed cameras that are used for that, and 46 pan-tilt zoom cameras. So overall, in total, we have 425 traffic cameras between detection and monitoring that we're able to look at to see what's going on throughout the city. And it's right now approximately 40% of our signalized intersections have video detection of some sort at them, and that's where we're going, is moving towards video detection. And 2 of the big reasons for that is motorcycle and bicycle detection. It's the traditional loops and the magnetometers and wireless sensors and the different things that we've used through the years just don't do a very good job of detecting motorcycles and bicycles. And we're trying to go with video detection, is that it just does a better job of detecting those smaller vehicles. Next in our assets that we work with, it's our communication network. So the city, we have fiber throughout the city that we use to connect to many of our traffic signals. We also use that to connect to a lot of the city buildings, such as this building here, City Center, City Hall, a lot of our major city facilities. We have a fiber network that's run between all the buildings, and then we hop into all our traffic signals as we're going along through all the different buildings also. In total, throughout the city, we have about 125 miles of fiber optic cable that we maintain, and that's our guys back here and the traffic maintenance team. We're doing all the things that we need to maintain that fiber. And then I talked about earlier too, we have the 4 adaptive traffic signal systems on the fiber through the city, which are East 26th Street, 41st, Minnesota Avenue, and part of Louise Avenue. And continuing on with the communication network, on the right side is a map that kind of shows where we have the fiber running throughout the city. And one of the things that we're constantly working on is redundancy and getting more fiber in the corridors where we don't have it, so we can build loops so that if we lose a piece of the network, we can just loop around and keep all the facilities going without, we have some backup microwaves that IT uses too, but that's a lot slower communication. So we're trying to build out the fiber network so we can keep the faster communications through all the city buildings throughout the city. About 70% of our traffic signals are connected to fiber, and about 90% of the city facilities are connected to the fiber system that we maintain. And then managing and maintaining our city's assets, we go, one of the things that we do is it's counting traffic that we have out on the road. We partner with the DOT to count approximately 650 road segments every year for 24-hour counts throughout the city. That's on the collectors, arterials, and the interstates that range throughout our city. And then along with that, we're also collecting turning movement count data from over 100 intersections every year on about a 3-year rotation, where we're using that data to look for signal warrants, or if we need to make timing changes or adjustments at intersections. So that's using these cameras that we set up at the intersections on the poles, and then we take them down and we move them to other intersections. It's kind of a, I want to say, a mobile camera system. We're able to move around to the different intersections and set up to collect data that we use for getting that turning movement data. I'm going to talk a little bit more later on what we use that data for. And then we have, every year we have our annual long line painting program that we do, where we go out in the spring and the 4-inch wide yellow and white lines that are the regular waterborne paint. We go and repaint those every spring. And then we do some touch-up work in the fall, depending on if it's needed in areas or what's been overlaid. We try to keep up with that program too, and try to touch up whatever we need to with the long line paint. And then we also have two of the other pavement markings that we use extensively throughout the city are our epoxy paint, which we use for the crosswalks, arrows, stop bars, for the majority of those. And that's the material that lasts about 3 to 7 years, depending on the amount of traffic we have at an intersection. And then we also have preformed tape that's put down on any new concrete projects that we have, which is a material that lasts 7 to 12 years. And I don't know if Dan's got it back here. He's going to kind of show you real quick. One of the things that we do with the pavement markings, we have a pavement marking retroreflectometer. So when we say 3 to 7 years, 7 to 12 years, we can actually, when we think that it might be getting to the end of its life, we can go out and check the retroreflectivity on the pavement markings too, to see if we need to up it into the program, when we need to make an improve, or whenever we need to go out and replace the tape or redo the epoxy at an intersection. So we're just kind of showing you some of the tools we use for what we're doing. So, and then we're working with Ryan's group more and more on trying to do proactive signal inspections, where we're going through and doing things like every year we're going through every intersection, and there's a conflict monitor that's in every traffic signal cabinet. And it's this little box that reads the voltage on all the lines going out into the field, and it makes sure that we don't get greens from two directions that shouldn't be green at the same time. And what it does is it makes the signal go into flash if it detects that. And so we have a program where we go and take that device every year and rotate it out, and we have a device back in the office that we put it on that certifies it, that it's working correctly and capturing everything correctly. And then once we've certified it, then we'll rotate it into the next intersection and kind of do a continuous rotation where we're switching those out. So that's part of our proactive maintenance program that we do with the signals. And then one of the things that we're always trying to work with is managing resident expectations. And one of the things that for the last 25 years in our long-range transportation plan, we're always reaching out to try to get information from the public and feedback, and they're always improving the timing of traffic signals is one of the things that people are always willing to spend money on in in those surveys, which means they want us to get them better. They don't want to see greens. And one of the things that we're talking about is that really in the last 30 years, there's been many advances in traffic signal operations and how the equipment works. The signals are getting smarter. We got a lot of things that are running so that hopefully we can get people more green time and less delay. But one of the things that we have to deal with is, it's hard to build ourselves out of congestion. Have a lot of people talk about induced demand, where when we start building out intersections or roads, that brings more traffic onto those too, where, you're kind of always going to see that increase in traffic, and it's, it can get hard to build out of congestion, where people kind of get an area where they feel, what I want to say, comfortable with a certain level of congestion along a roadway, and then they'll just keep coming to that roadway until they've kind of hit that level. So it's just interesting things with speeds and driver behavior and whatnot, where, it's just kind of a hard thing to build out of. But we're always working with perceptions and trying to, we're always trying to do whatever we can to optimize traffic throughout the city. We got a couple different things on here too, where you can kind of see, we got graphs where you can kind of see the peaks of traffic throughout the day. On 41st Street, you can see how it's kind of peaks up and stays throughout. And on Russell Street, you can see the AM and PM peaks on traffic are a lot more defined, on being a lot bigger. That's part of all the traffic data we collect throughout the year. And continuing managing expectations, we have almost 6,000 intersections in the city of Sioux Falls. 300 of them are signalized. About 2,600 have stop sign control, and there's about 500 that are yield sign controlled. So that's about 2,300 that are uncontrolled intersections. The interesting thing with the intersections, and this kind of gets into kind of driver psychology, and we try to not take an uncontrolled intersection and put stop signs on it unless there's a reason to do so, because if there's no crashes that are occurring at an intersection, and if there's not sight distance issues, and we don't have heavy traffic volumes, people will have a perception in their head that maybe that stop sign is not really needed, maybe it shouldn't be there, and then people have a tendency to start putting less value into stop signs that they do see. So that's one of those things where we try to put the stop signs where the stop signs are needed to try to make it so the public does a better job of obeying the ones that are in place. So if you've ever wondered why we have a lot of uncontrolled intersections, that's part of the reason. We went back and looked through the last 3 years on our resident concerns through our C-Click Fix and CRM system, just kind of give you guys information on what we're talking to the public about, what they're contacting us and what conversations we're having. We get a little over 1,000 concerns a year from the public that our team handles. And about half of that's traffic signals, you can see. The next on that list comes the signs and then speeding. And then there's only a handful of pavement marking concerns that we get each year. But it's just kind of interesting breaking that out and looking at it. With the different concerns and things that we do a lot of different studies with looking out, counting data, getting speed from areas, doing school studies. We'll do all kinds of different things depending on what the public's asking for at a location and what we need to do to look at it. Then here's some of the other tools that we use for different things. We use access management principles along the roadways. We have different high crash areas. When we identify high crash areas, we look for immediate solutions. One of those that we recently did was on Louise Avenue, south of 69th Street, where Avera, Lewis, and Culver's all kind of come together there. We changed how the median was done at that location, kind of closing off some access, where we had a lot of bad crashes that were occurring at that location. And then medians is one of the things that's used for capacity and safety. Roundabout considerations. We do a lot with our traffic model, where we model future traffic projections, especially when we're looking at studies, looking at future improvements, traffic impact studies for businesses, or if we do ourselves, we'll look at detour impacts for if we're closing a major road, what kind of traffic impacts that could have on the other intersections in the area. We'll look at traffic classifications and whether roadways are arterials, collectors, local streets, and we do quite a bit with long-range transportation planning also. A lot of these other tools are things that Shannon Austin works with quite a bit, so if we get into questions here at the end, there's things that she's available for things that you might be interested on some of this too, or me, depends on whatever you want to talk about. So next we'll get into real quick. This is our traffic operations center over at City Center. I think most of you guys have seen this. You can see the traffic wall. It's got a lot of our monitors on it, and it's kind of the work area where our team works. And then right here is just kind of a quick overview of some of the software that we use for managing our traffic. So the first thing that we do, if we're looking at an intersection and we want to look at maybe looking for improvements, optimizing it, something needs to change. First, we need to go get that 13-hour turning movement count for an intersection. And we've got the 3-year rotation that's going to collect that data. So whenever something comes up, we usually have data that's within 3 years old or less for an intersection. So when we want to pull it in to look at it, and if it's something big that we're trying to analyze, we may go get fresh data for an intersection. But so the first thing we'll do is we'll take the count data that we got for the intersection, and then we'll also look through the crash data that's available for that intersection too, to see what kind of crashes that are occurring at it. And then once we have our count and crash data, in the upper right-hand part of the screen, you can kind of see a network map where that's Russell Street, that particular one where we built out Russell Street. And so that's got all the lanes, all the geometry of Russell Street, it's got all the turn lane lengths, everything built into it. And then, so once we've got that network built, then we'll go into the lower left corner, and that's the data entry for each of the intersections along that corridor, where we'll put in that count information that we've collected. And then we'll go on, a lot of times we'll look at the intersection too for things that make a difference in how they operate, saturated flow rate, and that's basically how fast people are willing to move through an intersection, and startup loss, and that's how quickly people start up from an intersection from a stop. And it's interesting, as cities get bigger, those numbers usually get bigger for the flow and smaller on the loss, and that the drivers start being more aggressive. But the interesting thing, and Sioux Falls had that trend for a number of years, but probably in the last 10 years now, with cell phones, we're seeing our flow rates are starting to go down, and our startup losses are starting to go up at intersections. And so that negatively affects the operation of the intersection because you're getting less vehicles through the intersection. So it's a lot of little things like that we'll tweak in the software to try to best model how traffic's going through an intersection. And then, so then once we've kind of built that out at the intersections, some of the things that we'll look at is if we're looking at warrants for somewhere that isn't signalized, should we signalize it based on the count data and crash data that's available? And then a lot of the other things that we'll do is we'll look at phase changes, such as requests for adding left turn phases at an intersection. That's a common request that we have in different areas. And so we look at a lot of different things, such as delay, how it changes the operation of the intersection, crashes that have occurred, and we also look at how many people are trying to turn left versus how many people are trying to oppose those left turns. And we also look at what kind of offset that left turn has sight distance wise for the movement that's approaching it too. So those are a lot of the different things that we'll consider on if we should change left turn phasing at an intersection. And then one of the other things that we'll do is we'll work on optimizing optimizing the timings for an intersection too, where in the software we can go in and we can start either giving it a longer cycle length so we can give a little bit more to the left turns, or what if we take 2 seconds from this turn and give it to the through. There's a lot of things that we start adjusting and trying at the intersections, trying to optimize the overall delay for everybody throughout the intersection. So, and then the upper left corner it shows some of a software snapshot of our tactics software that we use for monitoring if the intersections are working correctly and in sync like they should be. And then in the lower right corner, it's that's a time-space diagram where we can take, once we get all this information and we've built out all the timing plans for the different intersections, we'll put them into the time-space diagram, which is on the bottom we have distance, and then going up and down we have time in this chart. So we put all the timing plans together in there, and then we start looking to see what kind of flow we can get from one intersection to the next. And there's one it's a little bit better, or a little bit, I want to say it shows it a little bit better, less colors, less scatter on a couple of the next slides that we have. I'll go through with that. And then the interesting thing here too, when we're talking about flow on these corridors, is that we're talking about cycle lengths and access management. One of the things that we're always trying to do is we talk about quarter mile and half mile spacing on traffic signals. One of the biggest reasons we try to keep our signals as close as we can to quarter and half mile is that you get natural frequencies for timing plans for what cycle length works best depending on how far apart your intersections are. And if your intersections are really close together, you have to have some really short cycles, and if you get really far apart, they start having to be potentially longer cycles. But if you have intersections that have really irregular spacing, then there's no natural frequency at all going through those corridors. And so that's one of the big reasons we really push in new construction to have those signals at the half mile and quarter mile locations, so that people 20, 30 years from now are able to easily build 90-second cycle plans where you go from one intersection to the next, much better than we do on some of our older corridors throughout the city where we have very irregular spacing. So next, this is another time-space diagram. This is actually coming out of our in-traffic software that's part of the adaptive systems that we use for the city of Sioux Falls. And so what we have up on the screen here, this is the Minnesota Avenue AM peak plan. And so in this this chart is showing, like I was talking about, the bottom is distance. So on the far left side of this chart is the South Minnesota Avenue and I-229 intersection that's running. It's the north-south line on the far left end of the chart. Now the far right end of the chart is the 18th Street and Minnesota Avenue intersection. And then the vertical lines throughout the chart are all the different intersections along the Minnesota Avenue corridor. And this is where the more regular the spacing is between the intersections, the easier it is to find timing plans that fit nicely between the intersections. So that's why the access management, the quarter-mile spacing, and something that we really try to maintain the best that we can. And so here, with this Minnesota Avenue AM peak plan, the blue line going from the left to the east represents northbound traffic in the morning. And that's about, depending on the time, it's a 39 to 42 second wide interval, but the whole period is 126 seconds. So there's potential where it depends on where you turned onto Minnesota Avenue, if you got into that period or not, that if you're in one of those white areas where you turn on, you potentially could hit 2 or 3 signals before you get into the green band that's going to the north along, or the little flow chart area running through theirs. And then the gray one going from the right to the left is representing the southbound movement along Minnesota Avenue. And then those white areas in between the blue and the gray, those are actually, that white space represents for it. It would be different on a regular time space diagram, but in this adaptive system, so that white space represents time that the adaptive processor can give to either the side street or the left turns, or give more time to northbound, or give more time to southbound, depending on, it's looking at how long everybody's waited that's at the intersection and trying to minimize delay for everybody. And then one of the interesting things too that happens, it's if you look at some of those areas where there's a big white space between the green bands, sometimes it'll go to the side street and then it'll go back to like north-southbound, and then there'll be a little bit of time left and it'll go back to the side street again. And so that, we get a lot of phone calls from people that experience that because they were on the side street and they picked up the little 10, 12 second flush that it had at the end where, the system's like, oh, I have this extra 10 seconds. I can go back and grab this car and get them out. And that's always interesting because that generates phone calls because people are like, well, I was the third car and I didn't get through in that. But if we were running a traditional system in those situations, the system wouldn't have come back at all for those cars. So that's one of those things that we could always make the system more traditional so it didn't do that. But overall, our mission is always to try to minimize delay when we're working on timing. So that's something that we're always trying to do. So this was the AM peak, then Minnesota Avenue. This is the midday flow charts going through the intersections, and then this is the PM peak on Minnesota Avenue, where you can see on the PM peak we've got a bigger southbound flow where we're trying to push more traffic southbound in the PM peak on Minnesota Avenue. And that's a big part of when we're doing those 13-hour counts, we're trying to capture what kind of different flow rates and what flow directions we see on corridors. Like on Minnesota Avenue here, that AM peak's in place from 7 to 9, the midday's in place from 9 to 3:15, and then from 3:15 to 6:30, the PM peak's in place, and then it goes back to the midday for the end of the night. So that's the slides that we had to go through. We're here to answer any questions that you have, me, team members, if it's something for them. So.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's very informative. If this is Traffic 101, I will poll the council members to see how many of them actually want to get to the next 4 hours of discussion. That's clear. And we'll see if we want to do it in small groups or that. But very informative. This time, councilors, questions. Councilor Selbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Heath. Fun presentation. You seem like you enjoy your job.
I do.
Could you guys not find a 3-prong plug-in for the stoplight back there? Or?
We actually have one that plug. I don't think we didn't bring the one that plugs in.
So there are 43,000 traffic signs in the city, and you guys know exactly how old each one is and the history on every one of them?
It's about 36,000 of them are in our GIS system, so we have the data on how old they are. There's a few of them that, when we made the transition, that aren't in there, but those are really old ones that we're working on getting out. One of the interesting things, one of the things that I've been working on, and we need to do more work on it, is trying to reduce sign clutter. There's a lot of areas where you get into some of the corridors years ago where the no parking sign was put up on every single light pole. So we're trying to go into areas like that and pull a lot of those signs down to open up the space more so that we're not cluttering things up with signs as much. And the one big thing is the less signs you have, the more people pay attention to the ones that you do have out on the street.
So is it, you'll have them like filed, like these signs have been here for 15 years, it's time to change them out on this or that? Or?
Yeah, we'll do different types of programs for replacement. One of the interesting things that we're working on this year is, it was a few years ago, we've got, in the residential areas, there was a lot of 24-inch stop signs, which I'm not sure if we have one of the small ones back there, but there was a lot of 24-inch stop signs in residential areas. And part of the METCD change a few years back was to put in a replacement program for going to at least 30-inch signs everywhere, basically. So it's, I think we started out, when we started this year out, we had 660 24-inch stop signs left. I think we're down to under 200 at this point now. So that's one of the programs. And the thing is, those ones are all at 15 years right now. They're all, because anytime we're replacing one that's hit its age, we've put the bigger signs in over the last few years. So we just decided to go out and get rid of all the rest of the small ones that were left.
Interesting. One more question. So, and maybe you explain this if I didn't catch it, but you're talking a lot about traffic flows and that. So on the southwest, we've got 69th and 77th, and I'm forgetting what the street is just in front of it, but we've got a holiday station there that's been there, and there's always been heavy traffic. And we finally got a stoplight there just recently. So how do you go about deciding where they're going to go? You're going to put in a light. I'm assuming you get some feedback, so then you start counting and that type of thing. But what I never saw before the light showed up, like how was it being counted there, or how did you?
Yeah, so that's when we count it, and that's we follow the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which are, which is the federal guidance that's given that we, per city statute, that's what we're supposed to follow for when we put in signals and things like that. And so that has guidance on 9 different warrants based on volumes and crashes and sight distance, school kids, all kinds of different, how close it is to rail tracks. If it could potentially be a reason to put a signal in there, it's probably somewhere in those 9 warrants. Anyways, so we've got a list of intersections we feel are close to meeting volume warrants that we're always looking at, and those were part of that list. And then we always have the public contacting us through the CRMs and C-click fixes on, I'd like to see one here, I'd like to see one at this location. And so if those aren't already on our list, then we would include them and look at those locations. But so the cameras that we put out there, it's we thought about bringing one, but we didn't. But it's they kind of have these bases on them that we strap to like signs or poles or anything that are out the intersection. Then they've got extendable poles that we put up in place, and it's this little camera that's kind of got a fisheye on it that's looking down at the intersection that sees the whole intersection and will record the intersection for 13 hours. And then we take that video and we send it in to this company that processes the turning movement counts that are driving through the intersection. And then we do, each year I usually go through a couple of the counts to verify each year that they're within about 5% of actual data. Usually they're about 3% within the actual counts. But so it's, when we put those cameras out there, it's, they're not very noticeable necessarily. So people don't really see them when we put them up.
Okay, interesting. Well, thanks for the presentation and all that you and the department do. It's kind of unsung work and important. Thanks.
Counselor Cole?
Thank you, Heath, so much for your presentation. I have a couple of questions about roundabouts. I love roundabouts. I know I may be in the minority, but can you talk a little bit about how the traffic pattern is different with roundabouts compared to like a four-way stop? And also safety, that's another concern that I have. Sometimes it's really hard to see bikers as they're coming around the corner. And do you have any information or anything regarding safety of pedestrians?
Yep. So roundabouts, the biggest thing on roundabouts when it comes down to it is, it depends on which studies you look at for safety, that overall the crash numbers between like a signal light or like an always stop intersection versus a roundabout can be fairly similar. But the interesting thing about that is the roundabouts generally have way less severe crashes because it's just the nature of them. You're not coming to complete stops all the time, so you have some rear ends, but they're usually less severe than the rear ends that occur at always stops. And then there's some side swipes in the roundabouts, but they're usually two vehicles that are going the same direction at almost the same speed, so they're not real intense either. So what we see from roundabouts is that the crashes that do occur are just not very severe. Roundabouts, one of the really nice things on roundabouts is that, you know, traffic signals, we have a lot of people that are involved in the maintenance of making sure that they're operating correctly every day. We're paying light bills on them. We're replacing equipment pieces inside the cabinet as they wear out over time. And, you know, it's on average, a signal is probably close to $5,000 a year when you break out average over its lifetime for maintenance, where those same items are zero basically on the roundabout because you're not maintaining the cabinet, you're not paying electricity. You have the light bill, but you have the light bill at any type of intersection that we would build. So there's a lot of positives on the roundabout. Probably the biggest issue we run into with roundabouts in the city is that the way that we get our right-of-way, a lot of times we just don't have enough right-of-way at intersections to necessarily fit in a roundabout. We try, we've got the one that's just finished up east of Veterans Parkway that we worked with the developer on getting that one in place. We've got the one coming on Western Avenue that we're going to be going in. We try to get them in place, but it can just be difficult at times, but it's something that we're always looking at, and we're starting to look a little bit at some of the more mini roundabouts in potentially in a few spots that could maybe fit in existing right-of-way better, but, you know, I don't know if there's more you want me to go into.
That was great. I'm very excited about the one in Western. So I've gotten a couple of questions about lights at certain intersections. Is there a resource where constituents can reach out or something where they can find, oh, there's a traffic light coming to Western and 85th Street in 2024 or something to that extent?
I don't know that we have a great resource specifically that says something. I mean, because we have upcoming construction. Yeah, the CIP, that's got a lot of different intersections listed in it that are going to be signalized soon. And so looking at the CIP, upcoming street construction projects or whatever, but it's you know, the public contacts us a lot just asking questions like that, asking about signals. One of the ones that we're working right now, and it's actually letting here in the next few days, 33rd Street and Veterans Parkway, a traffic signal for that intersection, which public's been asking for that for a while. And I field calls almost weekly asking about when that one's going to happen. So,
Councilors, other questions? Councilor Jensen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation on the 101. When you talked about the C-Click Fix CRM, that also includes calls in?
That's not our calls. That's just the. That's just.
But those calls are being included in in looking at a certain intersection,
Oh, yeah.
looking at
Yeah.
whatever, and that data is being
Yeah.
aggregated and and tracked. Is
Yeah.
that accurate?
Yeah, so we're just, that data didn't, or those numbers didn't include the calls that we
Okay.
make, which is,
Because a lot of,
doubles those numbers.
the
so.
great part about it is there's a lot of different people and they communicate in many different
Yeah.
ways, whether it be emails, see click it, fix it,
Yeah.
app, or, you know, my grandma would not give you a see click fix
Yep.
it. She'd give you a call.
Yep,
So just, and then also to Counselor Cole's question, and maybe just a, you know, forward-looking idea, is communication that you guys get, you're probably trying to get it out to as many individuals as you can, because you're probably getting a lot of the
Yeah.
repeat customers, like 33rd and Veterans Parkway. If there's a way that we can aggregate it, like in a C-Click Fix-It or our CRM, and push that information out to our citizens, and I know that we're doing a big website redevelopment, it's like that, I think, could save you a lot of time, because you're dealing with a lot of other stuff. Just a observation from my side. I have like 3 more questions if I can. One, what if a neighborhood comes to the city and there's just, and I'll give you an example. It's in my neighborhood. It was impacted this last summer with Cliff Avenue being redesigned, but you have Plum Creek and Tomar Road, and it doesn't designate a stop sign there because of the culture of what you said about the psychology of drivers. You don't get a stop sign there, but it's a very impactful intersection to my neighborhood. So if the neighborhood wanted to do something that it was in disagreement with the city engineers, how would they go about talking to the city engineers and getting something changed, whether it be a 4-way stop, a yield sign, or a you know, a crosswalk, so that they feel protected when they're walking that intersection?
Mm-hmm. And so we encourage them to contact us through the different various methods, through the phone, CRMs, C-click fixes. And in those situations where if we're working with somebody and what would be considered the regular, or, you know, how we would approach it, that we wouldn't do it, and then they reach back out, we really, really want to do something. Usually in those situations is when I would start bringing Andy in on the thing, and then that's when we start reaching out with talking to Andy, Mark, and, you know, just expand who's all involved in it then at that time.
Okay. Yeah, and by the way, you guys did a great job, so I appreciate that. And I just want a neighborhood to have some ability to control their neighborhood. And it's no offense to the engineer staff, not at all, but I'm just saying there needs to be more conversations, potentially. Second, and I think when this came, when we started to try and get this scheduled, and I've experienced this out of peak hours and during the afternoon, when you're driving north and south on Minnesota Avenue at different non-peak hours, you get the, you know, acceleration, stop, acceleration, stop, acceleration, stop. And I think the individual that talked about it was driving a garbage truck, which makes a whole lot of sense, especially for that individual. He talked about, you know, accelerating and then stopping a 40,000 pound deal. And I know you talked about it, but those types of conversations are being had amongst your team and the city streets team, because it impacts the street as well. So can you just kind of talk about that a little bit and how you guys think that through?
Yep, and so, well, and one of the interesting things, there's 2 things that can really cause a corridor to not work well for people at certain times. Actually, there's 3 things that can set off a corridor so that you get almost no greens when you're going through it. One is if emergency vehicle preemption goes through. If you get right behind that ambulance, you might, no, just kidding, don't do that. But after EVP, it's got this cycle that the intersection runs through, and then it has to re-seek its offset points. And if an emergency vehicle runs through a corridor, the corridor is kind of shot for flow for about 5 minutes. give or take. When a pedestrian crosses on the cross street at a lot of these corridors, the cross street times that are built in aren't long enough for the pedestrian, but we try to do everything we can to get the pedestrians to cross safely. So the time that's in place for the pedestrians to cross, where we've gone, it used to be that you time for 4 feet per second for the pedestrians. We've slowed that down to 3 feet per second, giving a lot more time for pedestrians to cross the road. But so what happens is when somebody crosses across on the cross street, that will take a signal out of coordination for a couple cycles too, which happens a lot, which it's interesting because it's something I look at a lot at 41st and Louise, where after a pedestrian goes through, if they go through, it'll be about 3 cycles that they'll affect how the intersection operates. And during certain busy times, there's a pedestrian every 5 to 6 cycles at 41st and Louise. So and there's some spots where the pedestrians, it's because we want to give them the time they need to cross, but if we built the intersection timings for that, we would have to have these cycle lengths that would be much longer. So right now at 41st and Louise, it's about 130-second cycle, give or take, depending on the time of day. And to maintain pedestrian timings at all times to that intersection, we looked, it would be closer to 160-second cycle that we'd have to have at that intersection. So that's something we've learned, people don't really want long cycle times. Then the other thing that can affect flow or progress on the corridors, I was talking about those time changes from 7 to 9, and then 9 to 3:15, and then 3:15 to 6:30 on Minnesota Avenue. If you're on Minnesota Avenue right at 3:15 when it does the change from the midday to the PM peak, none of the intersections line up for about a cycle or two either because they have to transition into their new timing plan. That's just examples of there's a lot of things that can happen that make them so that they don't flow the way we would necessarily want them to flow, but they're things that we have to do. We've had a lot of conversations, especially like on Minnesota Avenue with the adaptive. We could make that corridor flow even a lot smoother for the Minnesota Avenue traffic so that the trucks aren't stopping. That's something that we're trying to weigh versus how much delay we have on the side streets. Because right now we're trying to minimize delays for everybody, but that's something that we could always say at a corridor, if we really, really, really want a corridor to flow good, we could start increasing delays on side streets and make it so you're hardly stopping on the corridor. So, I mean, those are things that we can always weigh and look at if we need to somewhere, but.
Yeah, great answer. And
Yeah.
it just gives a lot of context to an individual like me that is not you. So I appreciate that. 2 more, Council Chair.
Keep shooting.
The, like 41st in Minnesota, PM traffic. Let's say I'm on 41st and I'm gonna turn left or south, to go south, sorry. I'm gonna be heading south. Is there a rationale behind which side of the street you allow to go first? Because if I'm turning left on Minnesota Avenue, heading south, I'm following the red light on a southbound. So are you guys tracking data like that, or?
We can. Right now, that one's set up so it can go either way, east to west, west to east. It could be changed, and that's one of the things that we can do is change a corridor so that we do flow that into that. I mean, that's potentially something that could be looked at. Right now, it's set up so that it can start from the west or start from the east, so that the processor is looking at who's been waiting the longest, and they're going to start the direction that's been waiting longer. Is how it's set up right now.
Because the experience I would be talking about is in PM traffic and Minnesota Avenue, that will get handled when we do the interchange, the construction. But what the experience that I've been hearing about is when they're turning left, they're following southbound traffic and it's all the way backed up. So it backs them up into the intersection, so it slows the.
So they're thinking they'd rather go after the eastbound traffic then.
For sure.
And that's something that we can look at. So.
Just a comment that I've heard once. And then this is just a comment, and I know you discussed it and putting cameras in and how powerful that was during the deal that traveled out to the mall. And our police force used that to catch culprits that were inappropriately acting. I think video on lights, specifically in downtown Sioux Falls, if there's any thing you need from the council, from a public safety perspective, that's very important to me. And I think I've heard it from other counselors that they want to have that sort of technology available so that if someone's coming out of dinner at Minerva's or someone's coming out of dinner at wherever and something happens, we're able to catch that on video and really track that down. So just a comment on public safety. It's very important for me, and I appreciate all the work that you've been doing to push that forward. So thank you for the dialogue, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Karas?
All right, thank you. Thank you, Heath. I have two questions, one for you and then one for Director Cotter. First, like the street calming or street diet approach that we've done on 15th Street. I believe it's 15th or 18th, one of
15th.
15th. How do you judge that at the end of the day? What objective data are you using to say the investment was worth what we got?
The two big things that we're trying to look at on those types of things is the count and speed data and the feedback from the neighborhood. Those are the things that we try to judge on if traffic calming was successful or not. So,
great, thank you. Final question, two questions go together, I think, for Director Cotter is, when we take away all the phone calls, all the emails, just look strictly at the data. If we're looking at the data, where should the council be concerned in regards to where in the community is traffic problems slowing economic development? Or when you look at your traffic situation of what corridor do we need to put investment in right now that would increase economic development in the future?
Well, I mean, we do a number of proactive steps. One of the things that we focused the first adaptive systems on was first 26th Street, then transition that to Minnesota Avenue, and then transition that to 41st Street, and then a segment of Louise. 12th Street's probably the next corridor for adaptive because adaptive traffic solutions, it's the most advanced solution that's available today. And one of the things that Heath had mentioned is that there's been a lot of advancement in traffic mobility and traffic technology, and now you're starting to see it, and you'll see what we've seen happen. And Heath, correct me. What we've seen happen in the last 15 years, you're going to see even more happen in the next 5. And so we're able to make those investments more timely without sort of widening roads and doing it more with technology, as opposed to we just didn't have some of these tools even 15 years ago. So, 12th Street's one of our key corridors, and we've got to continue to study the long-range transportation plan, anticipate where those large industries are going. One of the big investments we're making that we bid last year, will wrap up next year, is the 41st Street diverging diamond. Tomorrow, the DOT and the city will bid the next diverging diamond, which is at Benson Road and 229. We've got designs going right now that will improve other 229 interchanges, which really becomes, when you make those investments in the backbone, then we can get people on their daily commute. So it's probably not just a one-shot answer, but one of our next corridors is probably to deploy adaptive traffic solutions on 12th Street.
Final question. Final question then would be similar. We've got the 85th interchange coming up, which is a huge opportunity, going to create a lot of development out there. What's the next interchange that you foresee being a big piece of the puzzle that will open up something that's currently not open up?
Well, you're not giving us much time to breathe after we've been at the 85th Street one for over 10 years. The latest EA took us, certainly took us 4 years. I'm looking at you guys, Shannon. La Mesa and Interstate 90, which was really in that, obviously northwest area. a lot of economic impact, a lot of growth between Sioux Falls, Hartford, Foundation Park. So you'll start to see us study that one with the DOT. We'll let you know how the bid results come out tomorrow when the next diverging diamond gets bid. A lot of background traffic today that will see a massive improvement after that next one's improved.
Councilor Bronco.
Rather than chewing up a bunch of time, I'll probably reserve some of my questions for off the air. But one thing that I've received some inquiries about just over the last hour is, was the traffic light, has that been removed from the intersection of 41st and Bonson? I know that a lot of people were very pleased to have a light there, and it sounds like maybe it's no longer present.
Yep. So part of the 41st Street and Sycamore Avenue project, we're putting a permanent traffic signal in at that intersection. We were trying to keep the temporary up as long as we could, the span wire. We were running into issues where it was originally intended to be up during the 26th Street project only. So the spans, there was a lot of maintenance issues with the spans where they were pretty close to coming down. We had a lot of issues with heads turning, and that was kind of a factor that we kept discussing internally on that. But then along with that, the contractor that put that equipment in place, worked with us to keep it in place for a much longer period of time than they were planning to, and they needed the signal cabinet for another project. So it just kind of really played out that we really needed to take the equipment down so that they could use some of it for something else that they were doing that they needed it at. And maintenance-wise, it was starting to become a lot of maintenance to keep it going. We're encouraging the contractor we're working with on 41st and Sycamore to get that intersection up as fast as we can. There's, as with everything, supply chain issues with some of the equipment that getting it here. They've got most of the equipment for putting it up, but there's a handful of things that we're trying to work with them to finish acquiring so they can get it in place, the permanent signal. So.
But at the end of the game, there'll be a permanent signal?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
That's what I wanted to hear.
Yep. They'll have vehicle detection because it was just running pre-time. So.
All right, perfect.
Other questions? Well, I have a few. Let's talk about the Minnesota Avenue, the adaptive part of that.
Yep.
Is there any intent to extend that beyond 41st, 18th? Because when I come from my office, it seems like there's a red light at 69th Street. Then there's another red light I hit at 41st, or the interstate, then 49th, then 41st, and then I might hit one at 33rd, then I hit a couple of greens as I go through. So is there any intent to expand that?
There's potential to the south. But there's potential for going south to 57th and that way with expanding the system. The issue with going to the north is that we start getting into the downtown. And the downtown Minnesota Avenue timings are the way that that's done. It's in concert with the downtown signals too. And so once we started to do an adaptive system on Minnesota alongside the downtown, we would have to do millions of dollars of an investment in equipment in all the downtown intersections if we wanted everything to run smoothly between everything. Not that it couldn't be done, but we'd be looking at systems like they're running in like the London downtown and some things like that were real high dollar, heavy equipment investment situations. So, I mean, not that it couldn't be done, but
I appreciate that.
yeah.
There are several times when I have to leave early to catch an early flight. Now, explain to me why I hit as many red lights at 5 o'clock in the morning as I do at 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yep. A lot of it probably it's hard without are you sitting down on the actual data from the different things. And one of the things that's nice about the Minnesota Avenue corridor, at least the adaptive part of it and a lot of those, is that when people call in with concerns about things, we actually can go back and dissect the patterns cycle by cycle while they're driving through them and look at all the history of what happened. But, you know, it's A lot of it's just how traffic hits on the side streets. One of the big things on Minnesota Avenue, and this is when we've been working with the consultants that we initially put the system in with, it's at 5 a.m., it's actually running a tunnelist program where it's trying to minimize delay at each intersection individually. And that's something that we could actually change it and run a like late night off-peak program that we try to flow traffic along the corridor better in those situations.
Well, you'd have my
So
support.
that's something we could do. In the past, when we've worked on a few of those things with PD, they've wanted us to not go too far overboard with some of that stuff, and that you could end up with corridors that you'd just be green, so.
Don't do it on Friday and Saturday night.
Yeah.
You said earlier about that you're trying to minimize the traffic for everyone.
Yep.
On that. And I come back to something that my old grandfather told me, if you're trying to make everybody happy, you're gonna make nobody happy.
Yep.
So I would say that those of us that were raised on the fact that I think it was 27 miles an hour at one time, you could drive from one end of Minnesota Avenue to the other end of Minnesota Avenue and hit every green. And that's kind of what we're used to. But
Yep.
what I get from your adaptive stuff, when you're talking about people in the crosswalk, how it takes the system out of sync.
Yep.
That makes it easier for me to understand versus somebody sitting in the traffic center that sees my vehicle and turns the light red in front of me, which I still think happens, so I'm gonna have to switch vehicles pretty soon. Question on the turn signal lengths I get from 57th and Louise and 57th and Western. So at 57th and Western, sometimes turning onto Western, people come off 57, they turn and they're immediately stopped because the light is red up at where the interstate is.
So we've been working with the DOT on getting fiber under the interstate, and I think that we have it in now. So we've just gotten fiber in under the interstate, so we can tie everything back to 57th and Western. So that's a project that we're working on there, where we want to tie those intersections together, because the plan that's in place there, we were using the clocks, but the clocks, when there's nothing running between the intersections, drift. So it doesn't take much for them to get off 6 seconds, and it's when we're talking a 30-second window, if it gets off 6 seconds in a day or two, it doesn't take but a handful of days and the progression's completely gone through an area. So that's a project where we're trying to tie that whole corridor together with fiber. We had to work with the DOT to get a permit to go under the interstate, and we've got all that done now. So that's something that we're working on. And then one of the other issues we run into there is at 57th and Western, the bridge that's just south of the interchange that the DOT has there, right before the intersection, they've got that striped out without turn lanes. So the southbound left turn has to queue into that little area, and they add to the queue going through and increase the southbound queue really bad at the along that corridor too. So that's something we've been working with the DOT on, trying to get them to let us redo the striping on that bridge, because but it has an epoxy deck seal on it, so there's concerns on if you go grind it that the salt can start getting into it and cause maintenance issues. So that's something that we're working with the DOT on too, trying to improve that spot. Over at 57th and Louise, the biggest issue we have there is that 59th and Louise is way too close to 57th and Louise, and that causes us to have to run a shorter cycle than we typically would on an intersection like that. And that's because we can only store so many cars in the left turn lanes to go make that northbound left at 57th and Louise. So we've tried to make the cycle smaller to better match the number of vehicles that can be stored there. And so we get back up from those left turns on that corridor. And then at 59th and Louise also, there, it's an interesting, we've been getting a lot of complaints from the public on that intersection because we had a lot of crashes there. We had a 5-section head for the northbound left, so you could make the protected or permitted movement. I'd have to, how many crashes was it? I can't. there's a lot of crashes that we had at that intersection with people that were unsafely making that left turn. So I mean, it got to the point where it's like, we just can't let people make the permitted movement anymore. So we made that a protected left. And so that's also adding to the queuing issues that we're having on Louise. But I mean, it's queuing issues cause rear ends, which are a lot safer than the right angle crashes we were seeing in the intersection with the people that were making those left turns. So it's a lot of our issues at 57th and Louise are queuing issues related with 59th and Louise. So.
Well, thank you. My last question is going to deal with the upcoming winter we're going to have, and you talked about the striping on the streets. Now, some of our streets, if you look straight, you're fine, but the road actually curves a little bit, and you gotta follow the traffic. Is there anything we can do better to make it in the wintertime when it's snow-covered streets to make sure that the traffic will follow where they're supposed to follow?
So that's one of those things where we try to do what we can to make those lanes straight. Ellis Road's a good example of where there's a lot of back and forth as you're driving along it. And, you know, a lot of that comes from, we only have so much right of way sometimes. And so sometimes that ends up dictating it, but it's in those situations, if we can make it straighter, we try to make it straighter. We rely on the street team a lot for doing good snow removal and getting the streets so that we can see what's going on again, because that is an issue, so.
Okay. Other questions? End of questions. Well, thank you very much to the team that you put together. This is great. 4.5 years on the council, one of the best informational sessions we've had. I would expect you'd be ready to take it on the street, as you're going to get requests from Rotary and Kiwanis and Ladies Aid to do this forward. Thank you very much. If we have follow-up questions for the 4-hour section, we'll get back to you.
All right.
At this time, we'll move into public comment. So you have up to, how many minutes? Up to 5 minutes to speak on this subject. It's the only subject we're taking is about traffic today. Please come forward.
Don't run out. I'm pointing fingers at you too. Hello, my name is Todd Linson, and boy, I don't think 5 minutes is enough time. Seems like we got a lot of high-profile people that are dealing with this, and a lot of high-dollar salaries, and all I'm hearing is a bunch of excuses. Simple enough, trying to merge a digital system with an analog system, the adaptive system with the older system, and it's just, you're not seeing it. We're talking about the emergency vehicles come up, and they have the beacon that turns the light green for them, and then it takes them 3, 4, 5 cycles to get back to normal. That's unacceptable. If you had a piece of electronic equipment at your house like that, take it back to the store. You know, you're talking about somebody hitting the pedestrian crosswalk button, and it takes 3, 4, 5 cycles to get back to normal. Again, if you had a piece of electronic equipment at your house like that, you'd get rid of it. If I was operating a piece of electronic equipment like that at work, I'd shut it down for safety. There's the adaptive system, just thinking about 41st in Louise, and then you go north on Louise where the Walmart is there. Everything's getting jammed up there because it's the adaptive system at 41st and Louise, and you go north where the Walmart is, that's not the adaptive system, and these analog and digital mediums, they're not meshing. I mean, we've got all of these analytics and all of these algorithms, and we got all of these folks at the traffic department with all of this technology. You know, maybe we should just set that digital system to the analog medium until we get all of the adaptive stuff in place for it to run correctly. There's got to be some compromise somewhere, because you guys, you can't tell me that you've come down 41st Street or Minnesota or any of these other streets and haven't gotten stopped at least 75+% of these lights. I mean, you gotta know where the public is coming from. You gotta understand where I'm coming from. Whether if I'm driving a garbage truck, whether I'm driving a dump truck, whether I'm driving a heavy haul flatbed truck down one of these roads to do commerce in the city of Sioux Falls, and I got a safety problem, I got a rig where I have to be permitted to get out of the parking lot. I'm rolling 105,000 pounds down Minnesota Avenue, and I'm getting stopped at every light. We gotta merge these mediums. Something's got to be done.
Todd, you're supposed to be, you're actually supposed to address the council.
My apologies. I've got so many different points and I just don't have enough time. That's it. Have a good night. Thanks.
Thank you. Other public comment? Seeing none, we're adjourned.